So I want him to come on and explain a lot of this, different myths and, about the difference of the quality of products on the market, and delve a little bit deeper into Kava, which I first heard of when I was a psychiatry resident. I was giving my patients at the VA hospital benzodiazepines, antidepressants. And I remember one person said, I use Kava Kava. Do you know what that is? So I had to look that up. So that was a long time ago. That was 2006, I think. Yeah, that's like 17 years ago. So the veterans, they were looking for solutions. So anyhow, I would like to have Cameron explain a lot of all these, the complex story. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your health journey. I think that's how everything got started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the origin of it for sure. And I think that's how a lot of us who work in this field, in this world, and sort of the alternative medicine or health and wellness, biohacking world kind of get into it, right? Some yes and some not. But it's somewhat of a common tale that, people will get really, really sick and kind of have their back up against the ropes and, either be deathly ill or witness the death or the illness of a loved one. And, kind of out of desperation, kind of just delve into a whole nother side and perspective on life that they didn't know was possible in order to try to save their life or someone's that they love. And that was what happened to me. We always refer to it as it's been a pain to purpose journey, right? Where I kind of descended into pretty severe chronic disease early on in my life whenever I was just a young guy years ago. And you kind of developed one of these, what at the time, especially in the part of the country that I'm from, which is kind of in the South, in Arkansas, not the most progressive area when it comes to medicine. But it was kind of, referred to as an unexplainable illness, right? Meaning I had all of these symptoms that were just getting drastically worse, and the bottom fell out on my health. And I just completely became essentially almost completely handicapped and ended up near death at one point, with a severe, what I found to be an autoimmune component-driven illness that was just driven by neurotoxicity, stress, trauma, all those kind of things. But it didn't really have one label that we could give it, and it certainly was far progressed past the point of medicating or drugging my way out of it, right? Which it's like, as I learned pretty early on during this process, was no more than just a Band-Aid for the problem anyways, right? So I kind of went down that whole rabbit hole. Of course, I kind of exhausted the whole allopathic model and tried every medication under the sun, for all of my symptoms, and tried dozens of different diagnoses along the way, from psychiatric diagnosis to neurological diagnosis to gut, digestive diagnosis. And it's like, oh, how can I be just sick with all these different things? When kind of realizing, after going back to the base and spending probably 8 years doing nothing but scouring medical and scientific literature and just going back to the base of what is health? What is disease? How did I get here? Especially as such a young guy, I realized the truth and the reality that it wasn't all these different diseases. It was one disease process driven by a number of stressors and traumas, as where, we kind of look at it as kind of like a bucket metaphor, right? A lot of us have, used this to talk about how people get chronically ill in general. And it's like, everybody has a metaphorical stress bucket. Some people have genetically smaller or bigger buckets than others. And every stressor, whether it be emotional trauma, physical trauma, even chemical trauma, exposure to all kinds of different toxins in your life, is like a drop in the bucket. And then once the bucket fills up, you start expressing the symptoms of your genetic weakness, and you become chronically ill with any number of different diseases. And you can get all the labels that you want to for those diseases, depression, anxiety, all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's, all these diseases come from a combination of stressors and trauma. There are very rare diseases that have, genetic components to them that are truly, driven by that. But for the most part, it's epigenetics, and it's environmental stuff mixed with a susceptibility to those things. And so for me, I think it was probably a perfect storm, meaning I had some, genetic susceptibilities and got hit by the right combinations of traumas and stressors, and just had an explosion in my health, and which was kind of rare at the time. Now it's not. Now it's actually extremely common. You have like epidemics exploding everywhere from everything that we're exposed to, as far as everything from glyphosate to, problems with, certain vaccines and things like that, and other toxins and things, traumas, et cetera. But, and then drugs as well. So yeah, I mean, I just had a complete collapse of my health, and it led me on this long journey of kind of sort of rediscovering it from its base. Like, what was it? So I spent probably about 8 years or so, just kind of rebuilding my health from scratch and trying a million different things and traveling all over the place to try to get help. And whenever I was at my worst, I was pretty much completely handicapped. I mean, I developed this kind of reactive syndrome that a lot of people with autoimmune develop, where you start violently reacting to everything in your environment, like everything that you're eating, even chemicals you're coming into contact with. It makes life extremely limiting and near impossible sometimes, because whenever you're getting exposed to, like, every food that you're eating is throwing you into like a seizure or like an anaphylactic shock type of thing. It gets really difficult to navigate. And then had all kinds of brain and neurological, symptoms. And I could go on, but it was a complete collapse of things. And after many years of like traveling around, kind of engaging in like medical tourism, right? Trying these different therapies, talking to different physicians and clinics, and just absorbing as much information as humanly possible, I finally got aligned and connected with a network of doctors and a couple that became really good friends of mine that brought me into this world as far as from a career standpoint as I started to get well. But kind of helped me kind of assimilate everything that I had learned into sort of models and systems, right? Of like, okay, we need to first approach detox. We have to detox the body in the correct way, right? On the cellular level, right? We got to address things here. And then once we clean up the landscape, then we can bring in the regenerative stuff, and as sort of icing on the cake. And so I got in and have done many things like peptides and stem cells and hyperbaric oxygen, any number of different things. And that combination of things, doing the right combination of things over a long period of time, was how I got my life back. And so it's a miraculous recovery, because where I am today is light years from where I was at, which seemed completely impossible at one point. But so I got involved in this work, and I got involved doing a lot of different things in health and wellness and sort of the biohacking world, both on the clinical side, on the non-clinical side, and the research side, a bunch of stuff. But, a lot of people ask me today, sort of know me as, this person that focuses on this one plant, or I have this project specifically on true Kava. And so the question always comes up, well, why Kava? Okay. So you're involved in all this stuff. Why are you focusing so much energy on this one plant? And, I definitely believe in prioritizing, certain projects whenever they're needed, especially if they kind of help feed into a lot of other things from promoting certain ideas. And I came across Kava serendipitously, like along my process when I was getting well, because when I was at my very worst, I finally had come into contact with the body of information that eventually got me well. But the problem was, kind of, as I said, I was so reactive that I couldn't tolerate doing anything. I couldn't tolerate any of the therapies. I couldn't tolerate any foods. I had lost a large percentage of my body weight. Like it wasn't good. I was very, very, very sick and frail, and it was difficult to know how to move or budge. And I was on heavy doses of benzodiazepines, to kind of control the seizure and convulsatory activity. And that was going really bad place really fast. And I knew that I couldn't take those all the time consecutively, because that would lead to a disaster really quick once I went to the withdrawal process and got tolerance, and I was too fragile for that. So I came across Kava. I had already come across it before in a form, an encapsulated form that a lot of people know about in the States. I kind of dug into it a little bit. I met a guy who was from the South Pacific Islands, which is where Kava comes from. Kava is the primary sort of social elixir relaxation tonic in the form of a drink that comes from Oceania, which is basically like the Polynesian island culture, and it's been used there for 3,000 years. So I met a guy who was from actually Vanuatu, which is an island chain that's right next to Fiji. And that's basically where Kava's been used the longest. It's like a core part of their culture there. They use it for everything there. Weddings, funerals, spiritual ceremonies, social gatherings. They use it like we use alcohol or coffee. It's a sacred thing to them for reasons that I'll get into. But so I met a guy from Vanuatu, and he asked me when I was at my worst. I just happened to meet him serendipitously in the health and wellness world. And I was at my worst and I was like literally near death. And I'm like, he's like, have you tried Kava? Right. Cause to get rid of your convulsions. I'm like, yeah, I tried these little capsules and blah, blah. And he's like, dude, that's not Kava at all. Like that's like a sort of a westernized, sort of like isolated, extracted version. That's not, it doesn't, the effects are not the same. The medicinal potency and the medicinal capabilities are just different there. And so I was like, okay, great. Well, how do I get, because I had read so much about traditional Kava in the islands. And then I'm like, this little capsule that I tried doesn't reflect at all what I'm reading in these anthropological accounts. It's so sacred to them. It's like, so I was like, that makes sense. So he sent me some of the traditional preparation. He had, a family farm where they grow these really old, really mature Kava plants, taught me how to prepare it, sent it to me, and basically I started drinking this stuff and got these miraculous benefits within like days to a couple weeks, where it was like, I didn't expect to get anything like that off it. I'm like, okay, if it does anything, then I'm good. Right. But like, not at all expecting to get effects that were that useful for me from something that was natural. Yeah. So, I mean, basically within a couple of weeks, my seizure convulsatory activity that I was having like 10 seizures a day. They reduced by probably about 80, 90%.
Wow.
So just gone. Right. So that was important for me. That would be important for anybody, but it was especially important to me because I was getting seizures from everything that I was eating. So this relief from all these seizures allowed me to actually start eating again. Right. It allowed me to start taking supplements again. It was like a leverage tool that literally saved my life, because like I was deteriorating so fast, I could not stop these convulsions and they were weakening me every day, So it was like a miracle for me. So right off the bat, I was basically like praising the stuff. I was like, this is amazing. There's no way that it's like a natural compound is able